Hello and welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we'll be taking a look at just doing an AC system check. It's summer on my 06 Saab 9.3. The tools that you're going to need to tackle today's project are going to be as follows. First, you're going to need a good pair of safety glasses. You're going to make sure you want to protect your eyes because the refrigerant in our air conditioning system is a dangerous, hazardous chemical and it is under pressure. And furthermore, since we're going to be working around a couple of the key pressure relief points to be able to access the system, we want to make sure we protect our eyeballs. We only get one pair of those, make sure they last. Now instead of clear, depending upon your setup, you may want to consider having a pair of amber safety goggles and a UV flashlight to be able to help you detect any other leaks in your system if you've ever had dye placed into your air conditioning system. Factory default does not include dye, but if you ever had air conditioning problems in the past, it's not uncommon that a tech may place dye into the system. Next, you're going to need a thermometer to be able to measure the ambient air temperature because the readings that we're going to get off of our manifold set are also going to be relative to whatever the ambient air temperature is in the environment in which you're collecting this data. So you can either have a manual gauge like this. This is just a simple one from Robinair. Or you can have a digital multimeter and then set it to degrees Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius as applicable to your specific chart in your gauge set to be able to know what the ambient temperature is to be able to get the appropriate relative readings. Next, you're going to also want a set of nitrile gloves to protect your hands. You do not want the refrigerant on your hand. First of all, it can be very cold, and you don't want to get frostbite on your hand or other freeze burn on your fingertips if it leaks out onto your finger, because you may have a little bit that leaks out when you actually go to connect your manifold gauge set to your quick connect ports. So make sure you protect your hands and you protect your eyes when you're working on this. Next, you're also going to need a pressure chart. You can, if you just Google the phrase R134A temperature pressure chart, you can find several variations that will show what the reading on your gauge set and relative to what the ambient temperature is in the air to know what those values should be. And then finally, the most obvious tool of them all is you're going to need a set of R134A air conditioning pressure gauge set. Now there's a handful of different varieties of these that have different valve configurations. I've got a video all about this one. I'll put a card up in the corner here. This is one from Orion Motor Tech. It's worked well for me, and this is a 4-way valve, but they also make 3-way valve sets. So you're going to need to know how to open and close the various valves on your gauge set and in what sequence to be able to properly close down the system. So when you are collecting the pressure, that the freon, I guess I shouldn't call it freon, I should call it refrigerant, is able to flow through your gauge set and back unimpeded and not accidentally releasing that refrigerant into the air. Because you do not want to release refrigerant into the air, it's important that you capture it and you understand how your specific gauge set works so that you don't accidentally have a release of refrigerant out of a port where you're not expecting it. And so overall, your tools are relatively simple. And now let's go over to the car and get started. We're going to have to find our high and our low pressure service ports. And on this vehicle, they're over on the passenger side. Let me turn the camera around over here. And so we have one port right here, and the other port is actually tucked away right in front of the air box over there. So we're going to remove our caps here to get started. We're going to set these aside because we're going to need these for later. And now with our AC manifold gauge in place, now I've got my connectors here. So I'm actually going to work on the low side one first. This is the one that's going to have to snake down here. We're going to make sure that this is retracted back so we're not putting too much pressure onto the Schrader valve whenever we go to attach it. This is definitely a little bit more precarious than other vehicles, but still doable. And so we got our low side on there, and we're going to connect our high side over here. Make sure that all sits down and seals. Then we're going to connect this up by turning this clockwise like you're screwing it down to depress the Schrader valve, just ever so slightly. And that's going to fill our hose. And then I've got the manifold gauge set up top here. And then up top here, I'm going to make sure I'm going to open up. And here we can just open this up just ever so slightly. And we've got our gauge reading. And this is basically cold. And so on the low side, we're sitting at about 75. And on the high side, we're sitting at about 75, which is fine. Everything's off. We're going to start the car and come back and test it and take note of what the ambient air temperature is. I got my multimeter set up here. And we're going to put this on to temperature, and we're going to let this acquiesce. So this is saying it's about, call it 78 degrees. It's going to be important as a reference to be able to know what that is. And so now we're going to go start the car up, turn on the AC, and see what kind of pressure readings we get to be able to know what the health of our AC system is. Alright, so I've let the car run for about 5 minutes. We can see just in the garage here, the temperature is now up to about 81 degrees. It's brought up the engine temperature is going to raise the ambient air temperature here. So that's why I put the thermometer here over by the engine. And then now we're going to come up and look at our gauge cluster and see what it's reading. So then on the low side, we're sitting at about maybe 43. And then on the high side, we're sitting at about 170. So for 80 degrees at 170 on the high and 43 on the low, we are going to be pretty close to being in spec. And so I feel good about the health of my AC system on this car. Just that quick check, 5 minutes, and a set of gauges, and a chart, and a thermometer, and you're good. And that's all it takes to check the AC health on your car. Depending upon if it's low or high, on the low or the high pressure side can indicate if you need a new compressor, your compressor's failing, you've got expansion valve problems, or otherwise a quick check just to see how healthy it is. When you're all wrapped up on the 9.3, and you're satisfied with your readings, don't forget to replace the caps. We're going to remove the lines from the vehicle and then put her away, and we'll be good to go. Have a great day. Bye.